Okay, lesson 9-3, part 2. Something fun just for you guys to know. There are more trig functions, and today we are going to be focusing on the reciprocal trig functions. Okay, so first off, what is a reciprocal? Well, remember reciprocal, if you have 1/2, the reciprocal of 1/2 is 2/1. So basically just flipped. Okay. So we already know sine theta is opposite over hypotenuse. Well, the reciprocal function for that will be hypotenuse over opposite. Okay, so there are going to be 3 more trig functions that we are going over today. You will not use these reciprocal trig functions for anything other than potentially being on the ACT. That's the only reason why I'm going over these with you guys. So, first off, what are these other 3 trig functions? Well, there is cosecant, secant, and cotangent. And these are the reciprocals of sine, cosine, and tangent. Okay, so cosecant is the opposite of sine. Secant is the opposite of cosine. And then cotangent is the opposite of tangent. And cotangent, I mean, that makes sense that would be the opposite there. Okay? Now, cosecant sine theta, okay? Secant cosine theta, cotangent tangent. The way that I kind of remember which ones are paired with which ones, cotangent and tangent makes sense that they should go together. But a lot of people switch the cosine and sine. So the way I remember is you never have 2 cos paired together. So cosecant can't go with cosine because you cannot have 2 cos together. Okay, so that's how I kind of remember which of those work. But cosecant is just the opposite of sine, so it's hypotenuse over opposite. Secant is the opposite of cosine, so it is hypotenuse over adjacent. That's where the flip happens. And then cotangent is adjacent over opposite, which is just the opposite of tangent. Okay, so that's kind of how I remember those. Now, like I said, you really don't use these to like solve things with triangles, but what you can use these things is for what we were just doing earlier. So we've got cosecant of 150 degrees. Okay, so I draw my triangle. Straight across here would be 180, and 150 is 30 degrees away from that 180. So what I'm dealing with here is I've got a 30, 60, 90 triangle. So across from my 30 is 1. Across from my 90 degree angle would be my 2, which leaves me with a square root of 3. Now I need to remember how my negatives work here. So up for the 1, that's positive, but I'm moving to the left for my square root of 3, so that would be a negative square root of 3 there. Okay. So then we need to think cosecant. Okay. Well, we had so, ca, toa. Okay. And then remember, your C's do not pair up with anything. So cotangent, opposite of tangent, that one makes sense. Secant is going to go with cosine because you cannot have 2 cos together, which means cosecant is the opposite of sine, the reciprocal of sine, not opposite, sorry. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So if they want to know what cosecant of 150 degrees is, that will be the reciprocal of sine. So instead of opposite over hypotenuse, we will have hypotenuse over opposite. Everything else is still the same. Across from the 90 degree, my hypotenuse. Across from my angle would be my opposite. Okay, so 2 is my hypotenuse, and my opposite side is 1. So the cosecant of 150 degrees is just simply 2. Okay, so the whole procedure is exactly the same as what we did in lesson 9-3 part 1, but we just added 3 additional trig functions. Okay, so moving on then, next one we've got cotangent of 5 pi over 4. A lot of us are not very familiar with the radians, so if you aren't, remember we can always convert those. So 5 pi over 4, we're going to want to multiply that. Since I'm wanting to get rid of the pi, I put the pi on the bottom. Okay, so those would go away. 5 times 180. 5 and 80 would be 400, and then additional 500, so 900 degrees over 4. And 900 divided by 4 would be 225 degrees. Okay, so again, draw my triangle. Okay, 180 is straight across, so 225 minus 180 would give me 45. So we have just a 45 degree angle right here, which means this is a 45, 45, 90 triangle. So I can go 1, 1, and then this would be square root of 2. Okay, pay attention to my negatives. So I'd have a -1 and another -1 because I went to the left, which makes that negative, and I went down, which makes that negative. So I have -1, -1. Cotangent, that would be the reciprocal of tangent. So cotangent would be adjacent over opposite. Okay, so opposite side here, this would be my hypotenuse, which means that's my adjacent. So -1 over -1. And I find with that cotangent of 5 pi over 4 is -1 over 1, which is just 1. Okay, so cotangent of 5 pi over 4 is just 1. So like I said, nothing new here. There is some new stuff here, but the procedure does not change. The only new stuff is dealing with these 3 reciprocal trig functions. And then the last thing I want to talk to you guys about is just a special practice, which is dealing with, oh, that's not supposed to be 150, which is just dealing with things if we have 90 degrees, pi, and that stuff. Okay, so I'm not going to lie, like I said, these are our special ones, so these can get a little confusing. This one here I meant for that to be secant of 180 degrees. So when we are working on these, okay, we need to remember our unit circle. Okay, so remember our unit circle is centered here, and then it has a radius of 1 degrees. Okay. And when I'm dealing with these here, your sine, oops, I should look at cosine first. Your cosine is your x-coordinates, and your sine is your y-coordinates. So for this secant of 180 degrees, we are focused on this point right here, okay? And that point is at -1, 0. So if I want to know what the secant of 180 degrees is, remember, that is the reciprocal of cosine. So essentially what that is that is 1 over the cosine of 180 degrees. Okay? Well, what is cosine of 180 degrees? Well, that would be your -1. So it's 1 over -1. Okay? So this one, especially guys, a little bit tricky. This is not going to be on your test. I'm putting this on here. It's an advanced ACT type question. You might be using it in academic bowl at some point. So not something that you guys need to know for your test or anything like that. So if you're looking at this and you're like, I am lost, that's fine to be lost in this. This is kind of more advanced, okay? Last one we have is cosecant of pi. Remember, pi is just the same thing as 180. So we're still looking at this point here, -1, 0. Okay, so cosecant, that is the reciprocal of sine. So what is sine of 180 degrees? Well, your sine would be the y value, so that would be 0. So I have 1 over 0. And 1 over 0, well, we cannot define, or cannot divide by 0, which means it is undefined. It is not definable. So cosecant of pi is simply undefined. Okay? So like I said, special practice. This is not something that's going to be on your test. It might show up on your worksheet, but I'll be there to help you guys with it on your worksheet. This is more something that's advanced type ACT questions that you guys might see. So there you go. We got one more where we're going to talk another ACT question through.